Coming up on 716, well, last evening I had quite an opportunity, and I thought I'd share with the listeners. Had an invitation to join a teleconference with former Speaker Newt Gingrich. And, of course, when you go on a nationwide teleconference like that, and, of course, you know, your questions are screened, stuff like that. My question was accepted, but I'm not going to broadcast my question because my actual answer came in Newt Gingrich's opening statement, which you're going to hear in just a minute here once I get through talking and tell you the setup on this. The teleconference last night, Newt Gingrich talks about health care, and then the second part of this interview, not really interview, but the phone conversation, was a veteran that called in just to speak to Newt. And I think what Newt Gingrich had to say will hit home with a lot of our veterans and just a lot of our folks here in north central Arkansas and south central Missouri. Now, this is kind of a rough edit form. Whenever you do an interview, a teleconference, you know, from Mountain Home, Arkansas to the other location, the Newt Gingrich was on one phone in another city. The network was in another city. And, of course, I'm in Mountain Home, Arkansas, so you have a little bit of telephone noise here. So it's not the most polished broadcast edit I've done, but it is in rough edit form. And so this is a portion of the teleconference with former Speaker Newt Gingrich, and it'll just jump right into Newt Gingrich. So hope you enjoy what Newt Gingrich has to say.
And I want to thank the American Action Network for agreeing to host this very important conversation about where we're going with health and health care. Let me say to everybody that I think we're going to see tremendous changes in the next 4 or 5 years. For those people on the left who thought that Obamacare was going to be the last big solution, I think they're now beginning to realize that, in fact, it was almost certainly the wrong direction, leading us towards more bureaucracy, more paperwork, more government, more cost. But in addition, we're seeing an explosion of new opportunities to dramatically improve health outcomes. I want to commend Chairman Fred Upton and Chairman Lamar Alexander of the House and Senate committees who are developing a 21st Century Cures legislation, which is going to dramatically accelerate moving into a better future with better outcomes by really accelerating taking science out of the laboratory and getting it to us when we're patients and we need it. They're doing remarkably important work. I also want to suggest that this summer, the Congress is very probably going to come to grips with some very big issues if it turns out that the Supreme Court rules that, in fact, in a number of states, the federal subsidy cannot be paid because the law was written badly, and the way the law is written makes it clear that if you are a federal subsidy, if you're a federal site, you're not eligible for the subsidies. If that happens, you're going to see a tremendous effort to move towards a much better system. You're going to see, I think, a great deal of decentralization back to the state governments to get them engaged in helping solve the problem. And you're going to probably see something like a COBRA solution where people are guaranteed access to health insurance during the transition. Every Republican leader I've talked to in the House and Senate understands we do not want somebody in the middle of chemotherapy or somebody who's getting kidney dialysis to lose the treatments that are life-saving while politicians are fighting. So I think you'll see a very serious, aggressive response. If the Supreme Court throws out a major part of Obamacare, it'll be a response in favor of protecting patients, and it'll be a response in favor of decentralizing away from Washington, moving towards more localism, more local decision-making in a way that I think will be very, very important. Let me say one last thing, which is all of you who are calling in, or almost all of you, probably have a smartphone that you use. Smartphones are going to be the center of the healthcare revolution that is coming down the road. There are more and more applications. There's some 93,000 health applications that are now available. I recently got an EKG, for example, that fits onto my smartphone, so I can give myself an EKG and actually have it sent directly to my cardiologist. I have a friend who has a device that measures his oxygen level because he has sleep apnea, and he wants to know whether or not he's got an adequate oxygen level in his blood. I have other friends who are using it for diabetes. There's just going to be a tremendous wave, including in mental health areas, where we're discovering new ways to get information out to you on your smartphone so that you can be a better patient, a more informed patient, and have real-time information gathering. All of these things are going to improve health outcomes and are going to allow us to start moving towards very personalized medicine, where we will know about your genome, we'll know about you personally, we'll be able to measure what sort of drugs you need with a specificity that is literally impossible today. This revolution is literally coming down the road right now. It's not around the corner. It's not in the future. It is beginning to happen in a variety of places right now, and it's going to truly be a remarkable improvement. You'll have better health with better outcomes, with greater convenience at lower cost. And we're going to have to get Washington to change the laws to accelerate and enable these kind of new technologies and these kind of new opportunities. So, Mike, that's a very sweeping overview, but I know that many of our callers will have very important questions, and I want to let them direct this conversation where they want it to go.
My question is more broad than the health care issue. And if it's out of line, you can cut me off and move on to another question. I'm concerned as a 95-year-old veteran who spent 3.5 years in combat like many, many millions of us did. I'm not political, not Republican, Democrat, or Independent. I'm an American. My question is this. In your judgment, because I value your judgment, as a person and as a human being who's fought many battles in the Congress, how long do you think it's going to take this country to get back on track before the 6 years of this present administration? And this is not a political question, not only nationally but internationally, vis-a-vis where are we going with all the friends we had, which we seem to discard. What is your analysis of the country as a whole, very simply put? Because I value your...
Sure. But let me say, I lived through, as a very junior member of Congress, I was a freshman when Jimmy Carter was president. I was the only Republican from Georgia in the House, if you can imagine that. And then I was there when Ronald Reagan was sworn in. And let me give you just a couple of examples. I remember to this day sitting up on the Capitol watching President Reagan give his inaugural address. And it is literally true that when Jimmy Carter gave his farewell comments, the sky was cloudy, it was overcast, and as Reagan stood up, it was like Cecil B. DeMille had cast this. As Reagan stood up, the clouds parted, the sky was blue, the sun came out. And while we were sitting there, this is literally true, while we were sitting there, people began whispering. And I was looking around, and while Reagan is giving his inaugural address, people are saying the American hostages have left the Iranian airspace. They are now safe. So when you say to me, how fast could we turn things around, it depends on which things you're talking about. President Carter had refused to go to the Pentagon to give any medals to American military. President Reagan took the very first opportunity he could get, went to the Pentagon, and in the ceremony, which was then, grew the morale of every person in the military across the whole planet, pinned a medal on a young soldier and indicated how proud Reagan was of those who were serving in the military. Well, within weeks, that people just had a different tone and a different mood. And you can go through that whole series. So my view is it would take us, 5 to 7 years to get to a balanced budget if we had a Republican president and a Republican Congress that was willing to do the hard work. It would take a new president, 6 months to a year to turn around our international relations, and probably a year and a half to rebuild our military and our intelligence capabilities. But we're an amazing, resilient country, and I think that, President Obama's done a lot of damage, and I worry about how much more damage he'll do with things like the Iranian negotiation. I do think that if we elect a strong president who knows what they're doing and they enter office with purpose, this country could be back in pretty good shape within 2 or 3 years, and we would really look back and think that was just a bad dream.
I think that's a sentiment of a lot of folks around here. If you caught the very last part of that, talking about the negotiations with Iraq over there, Iran and Iraq, coming up, we're going to be talking with Senator Tom Cotton. If you saw my Facebook post, we just got off the phone this morning with Senator Tom Cotton. And after the news break, we're going to broadcast that. And it's about a 14 and a half minute interview. Tom Cotton's got a very busy schedule, folks. So we made the arrangements for me to be at the studio this morning at 6:30 to record his comments. So we're going to take the news break. And then after that, we'll play the interview we had with Tom Cotton here in just a few minutes. Stick around. Be right back. It's my pleasure to have on the phone Senator Tom Cotton, and this is actually being recorded at 6:30 this very morning. Senator, good morning. And by the way, you're making all the headlines, sir.
Good morning to you, Dale. Good morning to all your listeners. It's great to be on with you this morning, as always.
I just want to back off, give you the microphone, and let you talk to the listeners in north central Arkansas.
Dale, since you brought up the headlines, I'll just talk about what's in the headlines. The president's negotiations with Iran's Ayatollahs over their nuclear weapons program. I and 47 other senators sent an open letter to the leaders of Iran last week because they needed to get the message loud and clear that while the president may negotiate agreements in our constitutional system, the Congress has to approve them for them to have a lasting and binding effect. That is perfectly in accord with what our founding fathers intended. They did not want any president, whoever he or she may be, to commit the United States to these kind of far-reaching agreements without the voice of the American people, the Congress, weighing in on it. And this is not a treaty over, say, fishing rights with Canada. This is a nuclear weapons agreement with the world's worst state sponsor of terrorism. The president and the vice president and the secretary of state have been very defensive since we wrote that letter. I would say that's in large part because they know their offer is indefensible. They would let a deal sunset in as little as 10 years, and they would allow Iran to enrich uranium, the critical component of a nuclear weapon. I think this is very dangerous for the United States, for our allies like Israel, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that we get a good deal that stops Iran from having a nuclear weapon today, tomorrow, or 10 years from now.
Now, the re-election of Netanyahu in the recent election, is that a slap in the president's face?
Benjamin Netanyahu plainly staked his entire campaign on his efforts to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, which means also to encourage the president and the other 5 negotiating countries with Iran to drive a harder bargain. It was a referendum on that position, and the Israeli people spoke loud and clear. They want to make sure, just as do I, as do most Arkansans, and I think 71% of Americans, if you look at a recent Wall Street Journal poll, that any deal stops Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, that it doesn't pave the path for Iran to get a nuclear weapon. Look, I admire Benjamin Netanyahu deeply, not only as a statesman, but as a former member of his country's elite special operations forces. Mm-hmm. He and his family have sacrificed a lot over the decades fighting our common enemies. But in the end, our alliance is not with any specific prime minister or any political party in Israel. Our alliance is with Israel as a state, and yes, the people of Israel and the people of America. And I know for a fact that Arkansans stand shoulder to shoulder with Israelis who want to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon.
Exactly. I mean, this is probably, well, I remember the Bay of Pigs incident, you know, with Kennedy and was it Khrushchev in those days? Nikita Khrushchev, and how close we were. And Kennedy finally got the Russians to back down with the missile bases in Cuba. Of course, with the president's promise that we would never invade Cuba, which I don't think we ever have since the attempt on Bay of Pigs in 61 or 1962.
Yeah, Dale, part of the problem with the president's negotiating posture is that he has been conciliating with and coddling the dictators in Iran since he took office. In 2009, we had the best chance since 1979 to help the Iranian people replace the Ayatollahs with legitimate, democratically elected representative rulers in a constitutional system. There were widespread protests throughout the country in June of 2009 because the Ayatollah stole the election. And the president stood idly by, didn't even comment on it for over a week, much less try to assist them. And that's ultimately the problem with Iran. The problem with Iran is the nature of their regime. Exactly. The Islamic Revolution of 1979 is still in full force. They've been exporting terror for 35 years, killing Americans in Lebanon and Lebanon and Saudi Arabia and Iraq. They now exert control not only in their own capital, but in Baghdad, Damascus, Beirut, Sana'a. They have a very bad habit of killing Jews all over the world, not just in Israel, but in places like Bulgaria and Argentina as well. And until the nature of the Iran regime changes, we cannot trust that regime with the world's very worst weapons. And just imagine, they do all these things right now. Right now, they do all these things. They just helped support a Shiite militant group in Yemen that toppled that country's government, which had been cooperating with the United States without a nuclear weapon and with tens of billions of dollars in assets frozen because of sanctions. Imagine what they would do with a nuclear umbrella and with all of that money back in their coffers to line the pockets of terrorist groups like Hezbollah and Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
Yeah. Okay, I want to go back to what you just said a few minutes ago. We go back to the Islamic terrorism that basically started in the late 70s. We remember the hostages, the 444 days of the Iranian hostages. Now, what you said on the Senate floor the other day was a fair warning. I've got that audio in its full length on my audio on demand so people can hear what you actually had to say on the Senate floor. With what you had to say about our national security there, let's look at the late 70s and let's look at now. We had a weak backbone Democratic president in the late 70s in Jimmy Carter. Look what we have now. 2 no backbone presidents, and look at the terrorism we have.
Well, whether our enemies are transnational terrorist organizations or nation states that are on the decline but still aggressive like Russia, or on the rise but aggressive like China, weakness is provocative. The way to protect American interest and protect American lives is through strength and confidence in the defense of our interest and our alliances and liberty abroad. No one makes alliances with the weak, as Benjamin Netanyahu said on his recent trip to America. They want to seek out the strong. And I can tell you, Dale, and all your listeners, because of my position on the Intelligence Committee and the Armed Services Committee, I listen and speak regularly with ambassadors from around the world, to include ambassadors in the Middle East. And just this week, in speaking to them, they made it perfectly clear that in the Middle East right now, too many people, ally and enemy alike, do not believe that the threat of force against Iran is credible. They do not believe that America will uphold its security commitments. And it's not just in the Middle East. You hear that in East Asia as well.
Wow.
I think unfortunately, many people in Eastern Europe on the Russian border are worried about America's commitment to European security as well. And this is a tragedy for America, because America is a source for global order and stability, which is the ultimate source of our prosperity and our strength in the world.
Well, even Vladimir Putin in Russia has plainly stated that he can basically do what he wants to because President Obama's not going to do a thing about it. I mean, in a roundabout way, that's what's come out.
Remember, in 2012, caught on an open microphone, President Obama told then President Dmitry Medvedev, who's now the prime minister for Vladimir Putin, just to give him some space until after the election, and then he'd have more room to maneuver. That was talking specifically about missile defense. Missile defense. Dealing with Russia, the only country in the world capable of annihilating the American way of life because of its intercontinental missiles and its submarines and its bombers. And Barack Obama was caught on an open microphone saying that he would have more space to negotiate on missile defense. The only thing we should be doing is improving our missile defenses.
Exactly.
So we can nullify Russia's strategic threat to us. So we can stop rogue states like North Korea and one day Iran from striking us with a nuclear-armed ballistic missile. And the president, as he often does, simply wants to conciliate with aggressors. He's always soothing and supplicating towards our enemies, but he's harsh and unyielding towards our friends, like Israel.
And in my own personal opinion, I think that the problems we're having here in the United States, in New York and Arizona and St. Louis, is a direct reflection on the unrest in Washington with our administration. This is one of the most violent periods in history that I can remember, going back to the civil rights movement of the mid and late 60s. Do you agree or disagree on that?
Well, I just think that we need to have leadership in Washington that has confidence and is proud of the American way of life.
Exactly.
And
I don't feel that Al Sharpton represents that when he comes into Ferguson, Missouri. My personal opinion is I think they're stirring more things up. That's just me.
Yeah, we need leaders who recognize that America, for all of our shortcomings throughout our history, and there's no doubt there's been many, is still the greatest beacon of freedom and prosperity in the world. And only in America can you have people that rise from nothing to become billionaires or become presidents.
Sure.
Only in a country like this that is based on the equal rights of every man and woman, can you have those kind of success stories. And sure, we've got a few flaws, but they're so minor compared to almost any other country.
Real quick, I want you to remind the people your experience in the military in the Middle East, your service connections over there. You were both in Afghanistan and Iraq?
Dale, I was in Iraq as a platoon leader with the 101st Airborne in Baghdad in 2006, where I would note my soldiers and I were frequently making sure that we tried to dodge Iranian-made roadside bombs that were the most lethal bombs that we faced. And then I was in Afghanistan in 2008 and 2009 as a operations officer on a reconstruction team.
Good. My next question, real quick, then I'm going to let Michelle ask her question. Michelle Payton with Families Against Distracted Driving. Are you a daddy yet?
Not yet. Well, I have a little dog, if that counts.
Give your wife our best.
My wife is actually due 5 weeks from today, Dale. We're very excited
Wonderful.
About
very excited for you, sir.
Baby boy's arrival, and who knows? It could be tomorrow, though.
There you go.
Here anyway.
Michelle Payton now on the microphone with a quick question about this distracted driving issue. She wanted to ask you real quick.
Senator Cotton, appreciate all you do for the state of Arkansas, and but this past week we were testifying in front of Legislative Committee in Little Rock and trying to get a distracted driving bill to ban the use of holding your phone while driving, and it deadlocked 8-8 in committee, and of course didn't go on. On a federal level, do you ever see anything coming down to prevent or to ban cell phone use all across the United States?
Well, Michelle, I'm glad to hear that you were in Little Rock and you were meeting with your legislators and trying to move the legislation forward. I personally think that that's where this kind of decision should be made. I think Washington makes too many decisions on very important matters, like safe driving, that should be made at the state level. And as you probably saw, if you've ever been to Washington, you have much greater ability to influence the legislative process in a state, especially a smaller state like Arkansas, than you do in Washington. And there's so many bureaucrats in Washington, so many entrenched interests, that I think that these decisions are best made for the states. And that's not just on matters of driving and safety, but also if you look at infrastructure more broadly or education, a whole host of issues, very important government functions, very important issues like driver safety. I just think that it's better made at the state and the local level than it is at the federal level.
So there's going to be basically no attempt, like interstate truckers, say you got somebody going from Baltimore to Santa Fe.
Well, I think, Dale, a lot of states already have measures like the one Michelle is talking about in Arkansas. Yeah, that's true. Going back almost 10 years when I was in the military, I lived in different places all around the country, and the Army was certainly a leading a leader on this issue. Handheld devices were banned on most Army posts where I was on them in 2005 and 2006 because of the dangers posed. Mm-hmm. So it's certainly an important matter. I just don't think that Washington needs to be making all these decisions at the federal level.
So we need we need to keep the fight going here locally.
Absolutely.
Sure.
You'll see, as anybody who's been to Washington and Little Rock both know, it's so much easier to accomplish something in Little Rock than it is in Washington, D.C.
Sure.
You have access to your state senators and your state representatives, at church and local bowl games and civic groups and so forth. And people like John Bozeman and I, or Rick Crawford, your congressman, try to get out and get around as much as we can, but we represent an entire state. And we have to deal with 49 other states in Washington. And our founding fathers had a vision for our federalist system. Our federal government would take on issues like immigration, border security, national security, international trade and finance, and many other very important, very fundamental issues of government, like public safety or education, would be the primary responsibility of state and local government.
About 30 seconds for your final thoughts, Senator Cotton.
Well, as always, thanks to you for having me on, and thanks to all your listeners. I can't tell you how many phone calls and letters and emails we've received over the last few weeks supporting me and my efforts to make sure that this country is protected from a nuclear Iran and from other enemies around the world. I want to say I deeply appreciate your encouragement and your prayers, and please keep them up. We need them.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Our prayers are with you and your wife, and wish you the best, sir. Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye. And there you have it, recorded this morning at 6:30 here at the studio, Senator Tom Cotton. He also had a very moving speech on the Senate floor, I believe on the 16th. I think that was Monday. We was sent the video. Of course, I put the video on the Facebook page for Mountain Talk 97. If you're not to where you can get to a computer, you can access your iPhone. You can pick up the audio or the video of what he had to say. It's about a 30-minute speech from the Senate floor. I believe he did that on March 16th, which was this past Monday. So several opportunities for you to hear the senator. Time for the Sean Hannity Daily Update and other good things. As I always say, we'll be right back. It's almost 7:54. Been getting a lot of text messages and Facebook posts thanking us for bringing in by telephone Newt Gingrich and his comments this morning in the first part of the program. And, of course, Senator Tom Cotton. You can hear Senator Tom Cotton on audio on demand at Mountain Talk, either on the Facebook page or on the website, mountainhomeradio.com. Check on it. Could be, I think it's labeled AOD, audio on demand. Pick it up on smartphones. You can pick it up on a computer. We just try to make it as accessible as possible for everybody. A few quick announcements here. Been getting a few good things coming in here. Salem High School. Good to hear from Salem High School. The Salem High School Beta Club Bass Tournament is scheduled for the 28th of March. The 6th annual Salem High School Beta Club Bass Tournament scheduled for Saturday, March 28th. Takeoff and weigh-in are out of Panther Bay and Lake Norfolk. Registration is open now by calling 870-895-5921. You may also register on the day of the tournament between 6 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. The cost is $80 per boat. First place receives $1,000. Second place receives $600. Third place receives $300. Big bass will be awarded $200. Many prizes have been donated to be given away after the tournament. Come out and support the Salem High School Beta Club, Salem, Arkansas. Go Greyhounds. Wow, cool. We might try to get them on the program. What do you think? Mountain Christian Academy and Preschool announces early enrollment starting April 1st through May 15th. For information, call the Academy at 424-6622 or stop by at 1989 Glenboro Drive. Easiest way to access Mountain Christian Academy is on the bypass. It's, you can't miss it. Right there, just halfway in between the two ends of the bypass. So if you can, and by the way, if you'd like to give a financial contribution to Mountain Christian Academy, they'd appreciate that too. Do a fine job there, Lori Mathis and their staff there at Mountain Christian Academy. And real quick, Baxter County 4-H is offering a free novel writing program to help teens express themselves positively, overcome the fear of writing, and earn scholarship money for college or trade school. Volunteer mentors will guide students through the novel writing process during summer meetings on Saturdays starting June 6th